and our northern Kentucky urban cities. People keep telling me, Jean, the catalytic fund needs to buy that building. It's cheap. Okay, it's cheap. Well, there's a reason it's cheap. It's cheap because the cost to adaptively reuse this building is so high, I can never get a rent that supports it, right? I don't care if it's free. The actual value of the building is negative, okay? And if one more person tells me to buy something because it's cheap, I'm gonna kill them. Now, you don't want to overpay for your land. So, here are all these same assumptions, except I think what I had done when when we studied the market. Now, these were conditions from a long time ago. Not many people are getting $24.55 a foot today. Okay, rents have actually declined in this market, in Cincinnati. But let's say my market studies told me I could get that $24.55. I have my costs, my same set of returns. How much can I afford to pay for the land? So I'm going to back into that number. And it's a similar process. I know what my net operating income is now because I kind of established the market rental rate. I know what my debt is. I'm going to figure out what's the very most the lender will lend me. They'll lend me about 37 million. And then I'm going to figure out, based on that net cash flow, what kind of return I need. So that tells me the equity amount, the maximum equity I can invest in the project. And I know my maximum debt, I know my maximum equity, I know what all the costs are from the project, excluding the land. And when I back all of that out, this tells me I can pay about $750,000 per acre. Again, couldn't do this today in this market, but that would give me then a way to negotiate with the buyer what is the maximum amount I can pay. And again, I'm doing this in Covington right now. There's all these buildings for sale, and some of these darn property owners think they're worth this ridiculous amount of money. So I've got developers, and I go through kind of a process like this, showing them, do not pay $500,000 for this building because your costs are this. So anyway, it's all fun. So anyway, this says we can go out and pay, around $703,000 per acre, and go back to the project risks here. Are you going to buy it? So you're afraid of these risks, huh? You don't want to sign a contract
I need to be controlled.
without all of these things being figured out. Who would buy it? Would anybody just go buy that land with these things to be ironed out? My company bought the land. And then guess who had to work out the debt, So anyway, these are the things that you face. A number of things happened with the project. The developers could not work out many of these issues, and at the same time, the market just cratered. It was a terrible time. And so we had borrowed money and convinced the lender to provide a loan to buy the land, right? And it wasn't good. So I learned a lot of loan workouts during that era. So anyway, again, we can do our same sensitivity tables, and it's kind of interesting to look at some of the variation If your rental rate is only $20 versus the $24.55, that shows that the land would only be worth $41,000 an acre. Okay, so there's a big sensitivity here about how much that land is worth versus the versus your rental rate. Okay, now we're going to talk about arranging the financing. Can you get the money? And this is my favorite part. I love this. Real estate development deals are financed backwards. So there are different loans depending on the stage of the development. So you don't just get one loan. You used to, back in the prehistoric times, you used to go negotiate with an insurance company before you even started the building, and then you just kept that loan on there for 30 years. But that was a time when interest rates were very stable. Product was not built speculatively as much, so there wasn't as much risk. So the institutional lenders would make a pre-commitment and would feel comfortable about that. But the interest rate environment that I told you of the early 80s with the 21% prime, and I don't think any of you in this room can even relate to that. You can't relate to it, but I do because I lived in it. That changed the whole world in terms of real estate capital markets. So that kind of shifted the landscape to, you get a loan to build your building, and then once it's all built, then you can go out and get a more or a less onerous type of debt instrument if you choose to hold the project afterwards. Now, construction lender. Here's what's scary to be a construction lender. They're sitting there looking at some developer's architectural plan, all those assumptions that I showed you, and they've got to make a decision as far as how much to lend that guy based on what they think is going to happen once the building is complete. Again, do we know that after a couple years and the building gets built, we're going to get $20 a foot? Do we know that? Do we know what vacancy rates are going to be? Do we know what the lender's source of repayment, which is another lender? Do we know what kind of criteria they're going to have? We have no idea, really, right? So that's what's scary. So I get back to my original project, which was my $42.5 million deal here. So this is the pro forma, what we think is going to happen in 2005. But we've got to then borrow against what we think is actually going to happen in 2009. So 2-year time to build the building, 2-year period to lease it and stabilize it. And here are the different conditions in the capital markets. Interest rates in 2005 were around 6.5%, and they were based on treasuries around 4 with a spread, and this is lenders' kind of assessment of risk of 2.5%, okay? So that's, the interest rate that they're borrowing under. Oh, they're lending on interest only, okay? These are the great wild times. No principal repayment in your mortgage calculation. Lenders were very aggressive. Coverage ratios, 1.10, 80% loan to value. So based on all of this stuff, this borrower convinces a lender, and the lender buys it, that when the building is built, there is more than enough proceeds from a new loan to pay off the cost of the project. And actually, the construction lender hopefully will have a clue not to lend 100% of the costs, but let's say they lend 90. So anyway, this is pretty good. That looks like there's a lot of room there, right, for some bad things to happen. Lender commits to $38,250,000. Borrower borrows it and has signed a personal guarantee to repay it. So build the project, right? Borrow the money, build the project. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but people sort of say, okay, construction risk, is there any? I never really focused on that, but there are some risks. Rising interest rates. I mean, so a component of your cost is your interest carry. If rates go up, that adds to the cost of the building. There might be issues relating to material costs, if there's inflation, what happens if your subcontractor bails or goes bankrupt, labor shortages or strikes. That kind of seems weird, but I'll show you an experience in that. Weather delays in some parts of the country. Someone who misappropriates funds. This was my very first project I worked on when I was right out of school, Copley Place in Boston. Huge, huge project.